For more than 2 years now, the war in Ukraine has remained one of the defining conflicts of our time. Cities across Ukraine have endured missile strikes and drone attacks. Entire communities have faced the consequences of Russia's invasion, while Ukrainian forces continue defending their country across a long and difficult front line. And during moments like this, when the war enters another uncertain phase, attention often shifts beyond the battlefield. Attention moves toward political leaders, toward governments, toward voices whose words shape how the world understands the conflict. Recently, that attention turned toward former United States President Donald Trump. Trump responded publicly as the war in Ukraine continued to develop. His comments came during a moment when the conflict between Russia and Ukraine remained intense, with fighting continuing and the situation drawing renewed global focus. Whenever a prominent political figure speaks about a war of this scale, the remarks quickly become part of a larger international conversation, because the war in Ukraine is not only a military confrontation, it is also a global issue discussed in parliaments, international summits, and political campaigns across many countries. And the United States has played a major role in the international response to Russia's invasion. American political leaders from both major parties have addressed the conflict repeatedly since the war began. Statements from Washington carry influence not only inside the United States, but also among allied nations that have supported Ukraine. So when Trump spoke about the war, his remarks drew immediate attention. His response arrived at a moment when the war itself had entered what many observers described as another dangerous phase. Russian attacks have continued. Ukrainian defenses remain active across multiple regions. And the international community continues debating how to respond to the ongoing conflict. Against that backdrop, Trump's words became part of the broader discussion about how the war should be viewed and how governments might approach the situation going forward. Political statements about a conflict can shape perceptions, they can influence debate, and they can affect how citizens in different countries understand what is happening on the ground. The war in Ukraine has already generated countless discussions in the United States about international support, diplomacy, and military assistance. Those discussions continue today. Trump's response added another voice to that ongoing conversation. When he addressed the war, attention quickly focused on how his remarks might fit into the wider political landscape. Supporters listened carefully, critics examined the comments closely, and journalists across the world reported the statement as part of the continuing dialogue surrounding Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For Ukraine itself, the situation remains deeply personal. While global political debate continues, Ukrainian cities and villages still face the direct consequences of the war. Air raid sirens still sound across the country. Defensive forces remain active along the front lines. And millions of Ukrainians continue living with the daily reality created by Russia's invasion. That contrast between political conversation and the experience on the ground often becomes clear during moments like this. Statements from international figures may influence diplomatic discussions, but for Ukrainians themselves, the focus remains on defending their country and protecting their communities. The war has reshaped lives across the country. Families have left homes, cities have rebuilt after attacks. Soldiers have remained on the front lines defending Ukrainian territory. Those realities continue regardless of political debates taking place far from the battlefield. Still, political reactions matter, because international support, diplomatic pressure, and global awareness all play roles in shaping the larger environment surrounding the war. Trump's response, therefore, became one more element in that environment. Another statement added to the ongoing conversation about how the world views Russia's war against Ukraine. As his remarks circulated across news outlets and social media platforms, they prompted discussion among political leaders, analysts, and citizens following the conflict. Some focused on the implications of his words. Others considered how they reflected broader debates about international policy and military support. In many ways, the attention surrounding Trump's statement reflected something larger. The fact that Russia's war in Ukraine continues to command global focus. Years after the invasion began, the conflict remains central to discussions about international security and geopolitical stability. And when influential voices speak about the war, their comments quickly become part of that conversation. One observer watching the debate unfold summed up the moment in a simple sentence. "The war continues," he said quietly. Those words carried a weight that extended beyond politics, because while statements and reactions appear across television screens and political stages, the conflict itself remains active on the ground in Ukraine. Cities still endure attacks. Soldiers still defend their positions, and the country continues facing the consequences of Russia's invasion. In that context, every international response becomes part of a much larger picture. A picture defined not only by political dialogue, but by the determination of Ukraine to continue standing against aggression. As Donald Trump's remarks about the war in Ukraine began circulating, the reaction spread quickly through political and media circles. Comments from prominent political figures often move rapidly across the modern information landscape. Television networks discuss them, analysts examine their meaning, and audiences across different countries listen closely to what has been said. In this case, the topic at the center of the conversation remained the same conflict that has shaped global politics for years: Russia's war against Ukraine. The invasion launched by Russia changed the security landscape of Europe and triggered an international response that continues today. Governments across North America and Europe have debated how to respond, how to support Ukraine, and how to address the wider implications of the war. Within the United States, those discussions have taken place in Congress, during political campaigns, and across national media platforms. So when Trump addressed the conflict, his comments immediately became part of that ongoing discussion. Supporters of Ukraine have often emphasized the importance of international solidarity with the country defending itself against Russia's invasion. Ukrainian leaders have repeatedly called on democratic nations to maintain support as the war continues. At the same time, political debates within different countries sometimes reflect differing perspectives about the scale and nature of that support. Trump's remarks entered that environment of discussion. His words were reported by journalists covering both American politics and the war in Ukraine. The response illustrated how closely connected international politics has become with the events unfolding on the battlefield. For Ukrainians, however, the situation continues to be defined primarily by what happens on their own land. While international figures debate the war, Ukrainian soldiers remain on the front lines. Cities remain under threat from missile and drone attacks launched by Russian forces. Civilian life continues under the shadow of air raid sirens and defensive alerts. These realities form the background against which global political statements are interpreted, because every comment about the war is measured against the experience of those who live with its consequences each day. Trump's response also appeared at a time when the conflict itself was entering another period of heightened concern. Russian forces continue to operate across multiple regions of Ukraine. Military activity has persisted along extensive front lines stretching across the country, and Ukrainian defense forces remain engaged in protecting territory from further Russian advances. That continuing struggle has shaped how international audiences understand the importance of the conflict. The war is not an abstract political issue. It is a confrontation that affects millions of people and carries implications for the wider international order. Statements made by influential political leaders therefore attract attention not only because of the individuals making them, but also because of the conflict they address. Observers across different countries began discussing what Trump's remarks might indicate about broader political attitudes toward the war. Political analysts often attempt to interpret statements from prominent figures by placing them within a wider context of policy debates and electoral discussions. In the United States, questions surrounding international alliances and security commitments frequently appear during election cycles. The war in Ukraine has therefore become one of the issues that political candidates address when discussing foreign policy. Trump's response became part of that landscape. His remarks were reported widely and examined from multiple perspectives. Some focused on the political implications within the United States. Others considered how the statement might be viewed internationally, particularly by countries closely following the war. Meanwhile, in Ukraine itself, the rhythm of daily life during wartime continued. Emergency services responded to attacks. Soldiers remained deployed along defensive lines. Communities continued adapting to the challenges created by Russia's invasion. The distance between political debate and frontline reality can sometimes feel enormous. But the two remain connected. International support and diplomatic pressure often influence the environment in which conflicts unfold. That is why reactions from political leaders around the world attract attention whenever they address the war. In this case, Trump's remarks contributed another voice to the global conversation surrounding Russia's invasion. The attention surrounding his statement also highlighted something important about the conflict itself. Even years after the war began, the situation in Ukraine remains central to international discussion. Governments continue debating how to respond. Political leaders continue addressing the issue publicly, and audiences across the world continue following developments closely. During moments like this, the contrast between political statements and the lived experience of war becomes particularly visible. While debates unfold in studios and legislative chambers, Ukrainian communities continue enduring the realities of conflict. For many Ukrainians, the focus remains on resilience, on defending their country, on maintaining daily life even as the war continues around them. One Ukrainian observer reflecting on the ongoing international debate expressed that sentiment in a quiet remark. "The world can talk about the war," he said, "but here we live it every day." That statement captured the emotional distance between political commentary and the experience of those directly affected by the conflict. And yet both remain connected because the outcome of global political discussions can shape the support and attention Ukraine receives as it continues defending itself against Russia's invasion. As discussions surrounding Donald Trump's remarks continued, one reality remained unchanged. The war itself did not pause. Across Ukraine, the conflict continued shaping daily life in ways that political conversations could never fully capture. Frontline positions remained active. Ukrainian soldiers continued holding defensive lines across long stretches of territory. These positions extend through fields, forests, and towns that have become familiar names in military briefings and international reports. For the soldiers stationed there, the war is not a topic of debate. It is a daily responsibility. Defending their country against Russian forces remains the mission that guides every decision they make. Far from the front lines, Ukrainian cities continue facing the possibility of aerial attacks. Air raid sirens remain part of everyday life. Residents understand the sound immediately. When alarms begin echoing through streets and neighborhoods, people move towards shelters, underground stations, or secure areas inside buildings. These responses have become routine since Russia launched its full-scale invasion, yet even routine cannot remove the weight of those moments. Each siren carries the reminder that the conflict remains active. Each alert reminds citizens that their country is still under threat. While political leaders around the world discuss the war, Ukraine continues living through it. That contrast was visible as attention focused on Trump's remarks. Across international media, journalists examined his comments and discussed their meaning. Political analysts considered how his response might influence broader debates about foreign policy and international relations. These conversations unfolded across television networks, political forums, and digital platforms. At the same time, Ukraine continued responding to the realities of the war itself. Emergency crews prepared for potential attacks. Military units monitored developments along the front lines. Communities rebuilt after previous strikes and strengthened their readiness for future threats. This simultaneous reality, political discussion abroad and daily endurance at home, has defined much of Ukraine's experience during the war. The country's defense has depended not only on military action, but also on the resilience of civilians who continue living and working despite the dangers surrounding them. Schools reopen after attacks. Businesses operate even when windows must be repaired repeatedly. Neighbors help each other repair damaged homes. Life continues because people refuse to allow the war to erase their communities. International political debate remains important. Diplomatic discussions influence alliances and assistance. Statements from political leaders can shape the tone of global engagement with the conflict. But in Ukraine, the war is not measured in statements. It is measured in moments. Moments when soldiers hold their positions, moments when rescue teams arrive after a strike, moments when families return to damaged homes and begin repairing them piece by piece. As Trump's remarks circulated across global media, those moments continued unfolding quietly across Ukrainian towns and cities. For the country's defenders, the mission remained unchanged. Protect the land, protect the people, prevent Russia's invasion from expanding further into Ukrainian territory. Ukrainian leaders have repeatedly emphasized the importance of international attention and support. They argue that the outcome of the war carries consequences far beyond their own borders, because the conflict represents a challenge to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity that underpin international law. That is why political responses from leaders across the world continue attracting attention. Each statement reflects how different nations interpret the significance of the war. Each reaction contributes to the broader diplomatic environment surrounding the conflict. Trump's response, therefore, became part of that global conversation. Another voice addressing the war, another perspective entering the international dialogue. But while those discussions unfolded, Ukraine continued facing the same fundamental reality. Russia's invasion had not ended. Ukrainian forces remained engaged in defending their country. And civilians continued adapting to the conditions created by the war. In a quiet moment during one discussion about the conflict, a Ukrainian resident spoke about what it means to live through these circumstances while hearing debates from distant capitals. He paused for a moment before choosing his words. Then he spoke calmly. "People far away discuss the war," he said. "We wake up to it." The sentence was simple, but it carried a clarity that required no further explanation. For Ukraine, the war is not an issue appearing only in headlines or political speeches. It is the environment in which millions of people now live. And as long as Russia's invasion continues, that reality will remain the defining context for every international conversation about the conflict. Political statements will continue to emerge. Debates will continue across different countries. But in Ukraine itself, the focus remains constant: defending the country, protecting communities, and continuing forward despite the challenges created by Russia's war.